Welcome to Startups Ignite Impact Interviews. I have a really powerful guest today. And Sam, I haven't seen you since Hardware Cup a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, which you absolutely crushed, by the way. It was amazing. I walked into the room there to support my friend Jade and Fred and another founder. And then boom, there was another Startups Ignite alum right there. And you kind of, not to give away your success or anything, but you kind of blew everybody out of the water there. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and catch up with you. For people that don't know who you are and what you're doing and how you impact the world, can you give us that story, what you're up to and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So what I'm passionate about, I love the eyes and brain, all of that. So I always call myself a nerd. Apparently I say that a lot, but it's because it's true. So my background science-wise was in neuroscience, biomedical engineering. So for my PhD work, for example, I worked with low vision patients before and after they received a sight restoration treatment, and then understanding how that affected their brain. So anything related to the eye-brain connection, I love it. This whole, it's a corny phrase, but it's true. The eyes are the window to the brain. It's increasingly becoming very true. Even science today is finding awesome connections with Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's showing up in the eye. And what we're hoping is that as time goes on, clinically, doctors can use the eye as a way to screen for a lot of these diseases. So that is I love all of that. I love all of it. But I guess on the flip side, I'm also a patient. So I have a neuromuscular disorder called myasthenia gravis. And I started getting sick in grad school, and I was finally diagnosed about 5 years later. And that same year, I started JuneBrain. And I think I was actually diagnosed right after I started the company. But I started JuneBrain because I had such a hard time with my neurologist monitoring me. So they're super busy. They're brilliant, but very busy. I could only see them like once a year. So I started finding multiple neurologists. So I could at least find someone available within the next 3 months if I had a problem. But I saw what was lacking is a way to objectively monitor patients outside of the clinic, something very accessible to understand how a patient is doing. That's the goal of JuneBrain. We're developing this wearable retinal imaging device that patients can wear in the clinic, outside of the clinic, in a pharmacy, in a nursing home, so providers can remotely monitor those patients and understand how they're doing.
This has been inspiring for a number of reasons. One, for me as a product person, you're going into the medical device world, which is very difficult. So that's inspiring to me. You're brave on that standpoint, but
I think
and that seems to be going pretty well.
yeah, it was a certain level of being naive. You can't go into this business knowing exactly what will happen, or else you may not do it.
Yeah, I think all entrepreneurship is a little bit like that.
Yeah,
And it's why sometimes the best way to start a startup is to just go out and start talking to people and really
yeah,
go through the process. And so that's one reason why this is so inspiring. The other is that it really meets that impact thesis, is that businesses don't have to do good as a parallel path, but the structure of the business can have impact on yourself, your community, people like yourself, and the world. So I really love that piece of it. It's baked in. You're not, buy one, give one. It is good. So
yeah.
I love that.
Thank you.
We met, time flies, but we met some time ago in the Startups Ignite Accelerator,
Yeah, I think it was 2018,
maybe
2019.
2018.
Yeah, it's a while.
And I always remember this because you're very diligent. It's because of your academic background, but you'd get something and then you would just do it and it would be all organized and complete, which it made me happy and also kind of sad as a mentor because I felt like you were just doing it. And I was like, she's going to be successful for sure. She just follows instructions and does it and then makes that progress. I'm not really doing anything, you know? But
To me, yeah, I was
well,
following exactly what you guys were laying out.
you've gone on to do a lot more, but I want to focus in on not just Startups Ignite, but how is the community and the local resources and maybe the university system? How is that whole community or ecosystem supported JuneBrain to get you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they have been incredibly instrumental in me building this company. So, gosh, the university systems. So most of our funding has come from grants, so SBIR funding, and that included some pretty awesome sub awards. So with our first collaborator was with Vanderbilt. The professor there, she's still there and awesome. She helped us build the very first thing we could actually put on our head. And then Johns Hopkins now is our collaborator. We've licensed technology from them, like software to help support the hardware that we're building. All of that has been critical. And I think especially for us because we went through the proof of concept stage. That's just pure product development, pure fail fast testing. And working with an academic environment was perfect for that. And then from a state point of view, so TEDCO, for example, has been super supportive from a funding perspective, but also placing expertise on our team for a period of time to fill gaps that we had with reimbursement or regulatory understanding, and all the incubators that I've been through, starting with Startups Ignite. I think that was the first time I got my feet really wet with starting a company, presenting in a way that's not purely academic, but actually meant for investors, which I learned is very different. I wouldn't have known that. It's been important and incredibly helpful.
That's great. I just spoke with Mike Ravenscroft, and he's over at Momentum
Oh,
Fund.
yes.
And Maryland has a great support system. Of course, world-class medical innovation coming out of Johns Hopkins and the greater Baltimore area for sure. But the support system for entrepreneurs is so amazing. And this is really a theme that we see over and over again. And I talked to Mike about this, is people feel like they have to go far away and get this world-class support from New York or from Hong Kong or from San Francisco. In reality, down the street from where they live, there's a university that's filled with students and professors and research, and they're just sitting on research that's waiting to be commercialized. And they really want to work with founders and entrepreneurs. And same thing with the funding system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. So even on our clinical side, you would think, oh, we need to go find a major university to support our clinical work. Well, of course, Hopkins is here. University of Maryland is also 2 minutes from us now. So we moved to Baltimore just to be close to them and Hopkins because we received a grant for working with UMB. So that was funding support. Plus, the collaborators at UMB are doing the clinical studies with us. They've taken ownership of a lot of that work, which is they're our outsourced clinical team. Yes, interns, we've gotten, oh gosh, so many interns from high school on on up. Some of our interns are now full-time employees. So, yes, I totally agree with you.
UMB is another fantastic one. What they do with their entrepreneurship program and then with even the entire DC metro area is
Yeah.
unbelievable. Great, another great example of this. What unforeseen challenges did you experience? Because you are doing something that it's fairly difficult, right? It's software, there's clinical tests like you mentioned. And what are some challenges that you've overcome through this journey?
Me coming from academia, when I thought about developing a product like this, I thought, oh, it's product development and clinical work. That's everything you do at university. So I assumed that I could go the long run with purely grant funding. And we've most of our, I think almost 75%, more than 75% of our funding is from grants and competition winnings. But I learned quickly that at some point you have to raise from investors, and heavy investor capital is critical to moving a company through FDA approval, a medical device company. And it's especially important because grants aren't necessarily best for supporting legal expenses, which I hadn't even thought of that. That is a thing. But overhead and just everything needed to actually run a company around the product you're building. So I'd say fundraising is always a challenge. The fundraising ecosystem here I found is a bit different from the West Coast. investors write smaller checks, but that also means they're more collaborative because more investors join around than, say, one person writing a big check. I personally, I have found a lot of benefit from the collaborative environment, investor environment here. It does make it a bit harder to raise a lot of cash, but we have great expertise just among our investors, for example. Another challenge, I would say, doing big things with a small team. So my team is pretty awesome. Like, we're a diverse group of folks, meaning diverse in expertise from different parts of the world. Everyone has a different perspective, and I think that's given us a very strong company culture. But at the end of the day, we're still human. And one thing I'm really emphasize at JuneBrain is a healthy work-life balance, which is traditionally not what you look for at a startup. It's just the grind, but I try not to grind my team into the ground. That's not great. But it also means we have very limited bandwidth to do a lot of big things. So that's always a challenge.
Have you overcome that using partnerships, or we already covered that you've leveraged the university system? It's kind of outsourcing that and having access to a massive team. So that's really, really underutilized by most founders. But what are some other partnerships that have helped enable you to get a little farther down the road?
Interns, awesome interns. And they've come from the DMV area, also Pennsylvania, but a lot from the DMV area. So really breaking everything down into the smallest pieces possible for our team and then delegating to interns. And we've also had advisors who are super hands-on. So they'll take ownership of a project, like helping me write a grant or helping to spec out a go-to-market strategy, sales strategy for our first software launch. We've leaned heavily on collaborators, but also outsourcing to contractors is always helpful. But advisors and interns have been great.
It's fantastic. What do you see coming up? Because I've seen some really great news coming out from your LinkedIn, and I really ask founders, go and meet other founders. This is just an aside, right? This is an aside hack. Go and meet other founders, follow them on LinkedIn, make sure that you watch their progress because they're giving you hints, right? Success leaves clues that you can follow as well. I see great news popping up on my feed about JuneBrain, but I'm really curious what's next.
Yeah, so we are hyper focused on two things. So we have our wearable OCT, it's called the Neuro I. That's our flagship product. And on the back end, it's driven by an AI algorithm. So we've spun that off into a separate software product that can be used by researchers. So first up this year is getting our first sales. So first, no longer being pre-revenue, but actually having sales revenue from our software product. And then later this year, we have some exciting collaborations coming up with the device and it being used in patients who are severely disabled, for example. And then next year, it's FDA approval, the big one. That is our ultimate goal.
That is really exciting because that is the pinnacle for anybody that's done product testing. You know, people are concerned with UL testing or safety testing. And then there's a kind of a spectrum of the difficulty of testing. And this is, in my opinion, close to the top. And you should get a little medal or an award for it because there's so few people that have done that and get that experience. I think that in and of itself will be tremendously valuable for whatever you do on the other side of that, whether it's more products or another startup or what have you. But yeah.
That's so true.
For people that are interested, can you explain some of the differences between medical devices? So maybe if somebody wants to work with like a prosthesis or a wearable versus the different approvals that are required for that impact innovation.
Yeah, sure. So from the FDA's point of view, there's three classes of medical devices. So class one, I think of Q-tips, not too hefty of a safety risk. Although you can if you have a 3-year-old son. There's like I do. Yeah, it's a different safety profile. But then there's class two devices like ours. So our device is non-invasive. but it does require usability testing to make sure that people can wear it safely, and also just regular performance testing to make sure it's as good as something that's already on the market. And then you have a class 3 device, which is invasive. So you think of pacemakers, for example, or stents. Anything that's implanted in the body is a good example. And that carries the heftiest safety testing requirements by the FDA.
It's interesting. I've met many people that were interested in different class 1 and class 2, and to see that split and how that's actually realized, you did a very good job of describing that at a high level, but I don't want people to walk away and think that, oh, since it's non-invasive, it's just, hey, somebody's going to wear it and da 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 da. Yeah, but it is something really worth pursuing, and I think worth the effort. There's kind of a rule of thumb in startups is if you're able to get to that point, the level of effort to do that makes your business worth valuable X in and of itself, because you've passed such a rare hurdle. So it'll be interesting to see that progress go forward. But
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really like to hear from you if you have some words of advice for startups that are looking at solving big problems, because that's really what we're about, is like use our brain not to make another social app or an image sharing thing. There's lots of people doing that. Why don't we look at the market and say, here's a problem that's really big, that's worth solving. Can you give us some advice of just going for it like that?
Yeah, I would say for my team, the best thing we did was customer discovery early on. And even Startups Ignite, that was a heavy part of your program. And after Startups Ignite, we continued with it because it really informed our entire business model. And for me, for example, I'm a patient, I had a problem, but it was really critical that I not assume everyone has that problem, but actually go out and ask them if they have that problem. So it's validating that people have the challenge you think they do, and then understanding how are they currently solving that problem? Why is it working? Why isn't it working? And it's always hard to ask someone, I'm making this. What do you think about it? Is that good enough? Because people will say, oh, yeah, that sounds cool. Why not? But the step from there to them actually opening up their wallet and paying for it can be a big gap or a small gap. That's what you have to discover. So I think customer discovery is always my biggest advice. Knock on doors. With NSF iCore, their joke was, go get thrown out of the building. And my team was actually thrown out, I think, 2 times during our iCore. I think we were too creepy. It's okay. But really meeting people where they are and getting deep into understanding that. So one of JuneBrain's values is creatively serving the patient and the people that care for the patient. So for us, that also means finding creative ways to understand the patient and the providers and who is the ecosystem around those parties, because all of that plays into a successful business model.
It's wildly good advice. We're such big advocates of customer discovery because it's difficult. People don't want to do it. They feel awkward or they feel nervous. And you have to kind of future pace and say, well, if I'm successful, I'm going to talk to customers all the time. That's what sales is. That's what marketing is. That's what customer support is, right? So if I don't get over it now, then I have to deal with how do I reach customers? How do I talk to customers with no data, no experience, when a sale is on the line or when funding is on the line. But if we start it now, we can just have a normal human conversation about people's problems. And let's be honest, everybody likes to complain a little bit, right? So if you can't talk to somebody about their problems, it's going to be really hard to talk to them about your solution.
A lot of our customer interviews were just flat out venting sessions.
There you go. That's the perfect one, because when we're sending people out, I've gone far into this now is I say, don't even talk about what you're doing. Don't even worry about that. All you want is somebody who's willing to complain at you. That's all you want.
Yeah.
And if they've spent money to try to stop complaining, that's even better. But that's all you want, because that's the fuel that you're going to put in the engine to go to the next step and the next step. And they're not complaints. It's not a venting session. You're capturing the requirements. You're
Yeah.
listening to the user stories, right? You're getting passionate first adopters who are willing to go with you this whole long, because even if you're making something simple, it's not like you're going to launch the next month. So why are you talking about the solution, right? It's going to be a year. It's really great. But like I was saying earlier, I have such a distinct memory of this because people get hung up on customer discovery, doing the interviews, and you just did it. You said, hey,
I was a social anxiety mess.
yeah, I think everybody is though.
Yeah.
That's the secret is we want to say as entrepreneurs like I'll hire somebody else to do this or there's going to be a secret weapon that's going to come in, a wizard that's going to solve my problems. I'm not going to have to talk to investors or customers and I tell them, "You know what? You're right is you're not going to have to talk to customers or investors or employees because you're not going to have a business." It's problem solved.
Oh, yeah, it's so true. I know for us, if it didn't take very long with customer discovery to realize that our initial business model was totally wrong. And it wasn't so far off that we were still able to pivot. I guess that's the key word. We pivoted based on what the customers were telling us. And I think if we hadn't done those interviews, we would have gotten grant funding because it was still a great idea, but it would have been very difficult to get customers down the road next year.
This is a good niche point about grants.
Hmm.
And grants are amazing. I am a big proponent of non-dilutive funding through a number of means. So I'm really big on innovation challenges. But let's talk about grants specifically. If you don't know what you're doing and you get a grant, the money is used to execute on what you've gotten the grant for. So if you're wrong, you're going to spend a lot of time and your obligation on an SBIR is to execute on the plan that you've submitted. So if you don't do customer interviews ahead of time,
Yeah.
you'll find that you'll waste the next 6 months or 12 months of your life or the opportunity of a lifetime because you can't pivot as easily inside of a grant.
Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
true. Our NSF program officer has been really awesome. So actually during our phase one, we did I-Core after getting phase one. I hadn't heard of it before. So we did it backwards, but it still was early enough where I went to our program officer and said, it seems like we actually don't need to do animal studies in order to get to FDA clearance. It's not required. And he was very understanding of that, and that I think small pivots like that are okay. We were still building the device we set out to build, though. But you're absolutely right. It is much harder to pivot your technology within a grant.
Right. Because you're getting funding to execute on research, which is fully scoped. And so you're under the obligation to give the result of that research under the umbrella of that grant. So just a little note for people, grant funding is amazing. I help people get grants. We work with people that have grants, but understand like what a grant is for. It's not free money. It's money to execute on research.
Yeah, that's true. You have to track all of that funding for reporting requirements. So you have a certain percentage that can be used for overhead. Everything else has to be direct expenses towards that product that you're building. Yeah, so it's not super flexible.
So before we go, do you have any parting words of wisdom for potential impact founders?
One thing I learned, and it took a while to learn. So, for example, I'm a disabled founder, but that's not something I shared very much early on. I actually had one investor at some point. I mentioned my patient story in my pitch, and he came up to me later and said, "Don't ever tell anyone that you're a patient because they'll think you aren't capable of running a company." He said they're thinking it, they're just not saying it. And he was being generous by letting me know. And that, I think for a while I stopped sharing because of that. But the advice I would give now to social impact founders is to bring in investors, advisors, team members who understand the cause that you're working on and see whatever there's some limitations that some people see as a weakness. Bring in people who see it as a strength. It's really important that Your company values are reflected in your network. So that's even collaborators and vendors. It sounds like a big ask, but maybe not suppliers down the line. It's okay if they don't understand. But people who are actually hands-on with what you're developing, I'd say yes, spread your values as far into your network as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't possibly agree more. There's so many reasons why that is right. One, stories sell. It gives the context of why you came up with this idea, that you have firsthand knowledge and access to the big why of it.
Yeah.
Sure. Right? Sure. But also, if you want to get the best talent, if you want to get the best collaborators, if you want people to get involved in your startup, startups have nothing. It's all vapor. But when you have a mission,
Mm.
we can all get behind the mission and the story of executing on that mission. It turns something that's non-tangible into something that we can all follow. So if you want to have an amazing engineer, you want to have an amazing mentor, they'll believe in the mission way before they can know about the product, because the product doesn't exist, the revenue doesn't exist. So they can believe in you, but they can believe in the mission immediately. And those are the people that you want to support you, because you're not just going to make one step forward every single day. There's setbacks, there's difficulties. But if that person believes in the mission, they're going to go through those hard times with you because of that, not because they're looking at just dollar signs or
Yeah.
the proof, right? Like, show me the product. They're like,
Mhm.
I want this problem solved. So that's an amazing point. And that's at the center of why we're so focused on impact startups,
Hmm. I agree with what you said. I agree with all of that, including investors.
including investors,
Yeah.
for sure. I want investors to be somebody that I want to be around.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And there's so many out there who are mission driven. You know, of course you
Mm-hmm.
still investing is to make money, but there's many layers to that. Yes, there's some awesome investors out there.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Sam, before we go, I want you to just let us know where we can follow you. I want everyone that's listening to follow and track JuneBrain, follow what you're up to. Where's the best place to get those updates?
We're on Twitter. Our social media manager Danielle is awesome, so we're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I
It's
believe our
fantastic.
handle is JuneBrain Inc.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure that all your social links are in the description so people can follow you. And I really appreciate your time. I know that you're super busy, so I'll let you go. But thank you. Thank you for coming on SI Impact Interviews and for sharing your story and all those lessons learned.
Yeah, thank you, Callie. I love what you guys are doing, so I am rooting for you.
All right. Thank you so much.